us across Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, platform of your choice. Riddhi and I are very, very excited to talk to you about Teach for India, our vision, our mission, the fellowship program, and so much more. I'm hoping all of you are joining us to know a little bit more about the fellowship program and hopefully even join us. It's interesting that we're having the conversation just a couple of days away from our next incoming deadline. Our deadline is this Sunday. So the coming Sunday on the 20th of November is our application deadline. So if you're thinking about it, please make sure that you do put in the time and effort. But for the folks who are joining us for the first time, Teach for India is a not for profit and we work in the education sector. We serve children coming from low income communities and homes. The education sector really needs the work that we do because it's a 2 year full time program and that allows us to work with the underserved classrooms in government as well as low income fee schools. Our belief is that the fellows and the leaders act as teachers in the classroom, and while they are having an impact on the children, they're having an impact on the futures, the communities, they also go through a deeply transformational leadership experience of their very, very own. Each of them have a beautiful experience of their own, and it's very true to their own personalities and their own selves. But we'll get to know more about that because we have one of those leaders joining us today. Before I hand it over to Riddhi, my name is Megha Sen, and I currently lead fellowship recruitment efforts across the north and west of the country. Very excited to know more about Riddhi's experience through the 2 years and from a leader who actually decided to be part of the solution. So, hi, Riddhi. Before we get into the meat of the conversation, would love to know a little bit about you. Hi, I think we're finding it a little difficult to hear you. Um, I mean, what's a live conversation without some technical problems, right? We should get it right out of the way in the beginning. No, could you try and maybe change the audio output? Yeah. While we get that going, I know you may have a lot of questions in the audience, so please feel free to engage with us on the multiple platforms that we're online on. So we have our team, so our team will be answering, and we'll try and take a couple of those questions on the chat as well. Riddhi will give this one more shot. Can you hear us though? You can hear us? Okay. Why don't you go ahead and maybe respond to the question? Nope. Sure, no problem at all. While we do that, we see there are a couple of people are very, very kind and people are trying to help Riddhi on chat also to say, hey, like you're on mute and we can't hear you. We have a question here which says, can students of 11th grade be a part of the program? Unfortunately, the only thing that we can't have is children teaching children immediately. So the only ask that we have is that you're a graduate. You don't have to be a graduate of a specific kind. So it doesn't have to be B.Ed, it doesn't have to be education related, but you have to be a bachelor's degree holder to be part of the organization. Hey, Riddhi, I think we're back with you.
Hi, can you hear
Yes,
me now?
yes, we can.
Oh, awesome.
So, yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself before I get into the very hard hitting questions that I have planned for you today.
Okay, yeah, so I'm Riddhi. I'm a year two fellow at Teach for India, and I'm currently teaching grade 9 at Shankar Bai Mumbai Public School, which is a BMC school in Jogeshwari, Mumbai.
Great, thanks, Riddhi. Often when we talk about the 2 year fellowship, we talk about like the starting point, and we'll get to that. But when you're part of a very special cohort, you're part of the 2021 cohort, you made this decision in the middle of the second wave, which was devastating not just for the country but for the world. And people were kind of thinking about what to do, how to make things better, but at the same time were worried about the options in front of them. So we'd love to know how has that decision unfolded and how have you paved your way through the next 2 years that you've spent so far?
Um, joining in 2021, joining the fellowship in 2021 was a very interesting experience actually because, when I first started, all I could think about was how can I talk to these kids about academics when they're going through so much in terms of just basic necessities, in terms of what's going on at home, in terms of livelihood, finances, health, safety, um, but also like doing the fellowship in that kind of frame of mind, doing it in that kind of environment really taught me how even in those times you cannot lower the bar for your students, right? Like even I think that the real challenge of the fellowship is even in the midst of such constraints and in like so much chaos, um, you learning how to balance care and empathy for your children with actually still like constantly trying to push them towards excellence. So I think in that sense, joining in the middle of a pandemic was a very interesting and special experience for us and as well for the kids, right? Because they got to see a different side to who we are in the classroom as well. Um, and I think in that sense, also the first year and second year has been very drastically different for me and all the fellows in my cohort, right? I think in the first year, so much of what we did was just reacting and responding to what was constantly going on, right? We wanted to bring kids back to school, but we were thinking about safety. Um, we constantly went offline and online and back and forth, and that caused a lot of chaos and instability for kids, right? Um, but I think even in all that, right, I think managing to bring kids to school even through a device or even through like a mobile screen, I think that meant something so powerful. um, I think in the second year, seeing all our kids return back to school was meaningful in a whole different way, right? I think seeing kids return to school after 2 years, seeing some kids literally holding a pen and a notebook in their hands after 2 years was genuinely moving. And I think, um, yes, there was beauty in that, but there was also a lot of fear, right? Because you had to deal with what that 2 year gap meant for our kids personally, academically, behaviorally. And I think so much of what we thought we knew about like education, about our kids, had to be unlearned and relearned all over again because they came back as completely different children. Like my kids, they were 12 years old when the pandemic started, and now they're all 14 and 15, right? And they went through a very crucial period in their lives in those 2 years. So I think in that sense, the second year has been very interesting as well.
Thanks so much Riddhi, for sharing not just the struggle that you faced about the online offline, this constant juxtapose that I think all the fellows and all the teachers I think across the world and the country were going through, but also the adolescence that your children went through while they were in the middle of all of this. But to also say like we're not going to bring down excellence, right? Because that's what's fair and that is what they are going to have to deal with in the world. So really appreciate the level of excellence that you guys have continued to bring into your classrooms, because it's tough, with 81 children in grade then seventh and now to ninth. It's a difficult choice to make, saying do we bring down that bar. But really really glad that you didn't, and we've seen the magic that you've created. For anybody who's interested, please go ahead and check out Riddhi's Instagram pages. She has like tons of examples in her classroom on how to maintain that excellence. But coming to the question that you had about, how do we manage when they're also going through their personal struggles, and the 2 years have not been easy. Can you tell us a little bit about the community and the context that you probably learned? You spoke about unlearning and relearning. So can you tell us a little bit about what that meant for the parents, the community that you were also working with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the biggest difference, right? This is something my kids always say to me, that the difference between being a Didi and being just a teacher is that as a Didi, you are part of a family, right? Like as someone who they call a Didi, you become someone who they know a little more intimately, um, and outside of school as well. So I think spending a lot of time in the community, learning to ask questions and to figure out what is it that my kids, their parents, their families, and the community overall needs from you, right? As opposed to what you think you need to be for them. I think a lot of us, including me, I mean, I graduated from college and I joined the fellowship. So I came in with like a lot of preconceived notions about what working in the development sector was like. But I think this is the biggest lesson it teaches you, right? Like it's not about who you want to be, but who you are needed to be for your kids and your community. Um, and I think in that sense, just speaking to parents, understanding where our kids spend 15, 18 hours a day, right? I think that just teaches you so much about how they are and who they are inside of school as well. I think, um, you can't look at education in isolation, especially for disadvantaged communities in India, because it's not just about the 6 hours in school, it's also what they do when they go home. So many of my kids have had to contribute to work at home or to their family's occupation. A lot of them have to look after younger siblings. A lot of them have responsibilities that I feel I don't have at this point in life as well, right? So I think it just teaches you to contextualize everything that you're doing within the classroom as well. And I think that is something that helps you see education in a very different lens. And I think there's a lot in it for you as well. I think speaking to the parents in my community, especially the mothers, has taught me so much. It led us to start a project with our class in our community. It's called Roo. So our mothers are actually very talented at stitching things, right? So they used to just find scrap cloth all around the house and they used to keep making bags and pouches and things out of it. So we decided to turn it into like an artist collective where the women, they lead the project themselves, they create things, our kids paint on them, and we help them market it further. And yeah, I think spending time with community is what helps you see um, the entire ecosystem within which our kids are functioning as a whole. um, and I think that definitely makes this easier.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because like you said, education can't be in isolation. So you can probably take control of the 6 or 8 hours that they're in school with you. And also you spoke a little bit about being a didi and not a teacher. For everyone who doesn't know the context, the Teach for India fellows are called didis and bhaiyas, and that's pretty much uh, an amalgamation of the relationship that they also have with their children, with the parents. The parents call the fellows didi, so do the kids. And it really is a testament to just the barrier that is broken, the dynamics that can be broken of like a power situation. So Riddhi, you spoke about like understanding the community, and you kind of came right out of graduation, and you came in with your preconceived notions, and that's undergone a change also. You also spoke about your project. So speaking of understanding context and of projects, can you tell us a little bit about this magical thing that fellows do in their second year called the Be the Change project, or the BTCP as the nomenclature within the TFI ecosystem goes? Can you tell us a little bit about what it is, and also shed light on the two initiatives, the two projects that you currently are leading? You spoke a little bit about one, would love to know the other.
Yeah. So in our second year, all fellows get to take up a Be the Change project, as Megha said, and it's basically a chance for you to do something for your classroom, your community, beyond just teaching, right? So we are told to spend the first year getting to know the context of our classroom and our community, right? So whether it's through one-on-one conversations or community visits or going to the homes of our kids, right? Just to understand a little bit better about um, what is the real need in the community. And then in the second year, we get to take up a project where we, um, get to work with any one of those needs that we have identified. Um, I think for me, two things happened in the first year. One was very organic. As I told you, the mothers were just naturally so talented, so enterprising, right? They had so much like drive within them that Rue just kind of started on its own, right? It was just them saying, I have this talent and nobody's recognized it yet, so can you just help me put it out there? And I think in that sense, that project kind of came to me very easily. Um, and I think having a co-fellow is a very like powerful and important part of this journey, right? I think so. With my co-fellow who was in his year two at the time, we were able to start to. Um, I think the second project that I'm currently working on in my second year is called Nazaria. It's basically a project that brings together storytelling with digital art and activism. Um, it basically means that very often in mainstream media, we don't get to hear the voices of the underrepresented, right? We don't get to hear the voices of, for instance, 14 or 15-year-old kids from Shankarwari talking about things that matter to them or the issues that matter to them, right? Even in the fellowship, for instance, if we learn about our community, um, the question was, why should I, as a fellow, talk about it? Why should my kids not be able to talk about it themselves? So I think Nazaria was born out of the classroom. We were having a history lesson once, and we were discussing what the word voiceless means. And as a teacher, of course, I was like, no, it's talking about the oppressed who were not given the chance to speak for themselves and all of that. And one girl in my class actually responded by saying, um, there's no such thing as voiceless, okay? Everyone has a voice, people just don't want to hear it. And I think that kind of became like the spark for where Nazaria started. So yeah, now we have a Kahani lab in the community itself. It's a small room within the community where our kids get together every week. They write stories about themselves, their community, things that matter to them in multiple formats. And we try to get it out there as much as possible. So, yeah, that's it.
Wow. First of all, I would have loved to be in that classroom where history lesson was coming to life in that sense, and there was almost challenging the ecosystems to say that are they willing to listen to us if we were to voice our opinion, and from that to go into Nazaria, and of course to see the talent and the um, just the spirit that the mothers in your community had, and that for that to become Project Rue. I mean, I'm kind of speechless at this point, but I mean, Riddhi, let's be honest, right? Driving a project, doing project management at that scale must be daunting. It must be equal times exciting and daunting. So, would love to understand that, what does it take to establish a Kahani lab? What does it take to establish that? You said almost like a tribe or having a thought partner. In your case, it was a co-fellow. That was one of the enabling factors. But what else does it take to become a project manager for something of this scale?
Um, I think it takes a lot. I think the first and most important thing that you said is just a support system, right? So I think in a lot of ways that support system can come from your own kids. It can come from their parents. It can come from your community. Um, and it comes also a lot from like within Teach for India as well, right? So I think both projects, Rue and Nazaria, I did not do alone at all. I had a co-fellow with me in both projects, and I still do. And um, I think so much of of what it takes is just people coming together to make something happen, right? So even for building a Kahani lab, if you ask me what it took literally, I think it took a bunch of parents in our community literally walking around Shankarwari looking for a room and a space that they felt would be safe and conducive for this, right? It took multiple parents coming together to help us actually paint that community center and make it feel safe and homely for our kids. It takes so many artists and activists within the Teach for India network and outside to come in and do workshops for our kids on a weekly basis and actually expose them to these kind of things, right? So I think the first and most important thing is always a support system. I think the second thing, which I learn from my kids every day, is also just idealism, right? Like to look at a community like this and say that a Kahani lab is possible here, right? Or these kids deserve to have exposure to digital art skills. Like, I think so much can go against you when you're thinking of things like this, but holding on to that bit of optimism and saying that it is still possible no matter what the odds are, I think that becomes very important as well.
It's not much, right? Like just idealism and support, like
Yeah,
ecosystem. Not
just that,
much.
just
Just
that.
that. Okay, so Riddhi, like I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit because you spoke about what it takes to have that, and you spoke about the ecosystem. Your one of your project is with the community, and while the other project is a little more child centric, a little more your classroom centered. Can you give us examples of maybe some other BTCPs that are happening in the city that you're aware of, and at what scale are they happening? Would love to understand, like, just the extent of the work that we're currently doing in the community.
Absolutely. I think the range of BTCPs is honestly so inspiring because when you look at what your co-fellows are doing as well, right, you realize that if everyone just came together, how powerful it could be. I think I know a few fellows in my cohort whose BTCP is to provide differentiated, like academic support to kids who are struggling learners in classrooms. They create a curriculum and they create teaching resources entirely separate to what is there to suit learners who have some kind of either learning disability or are neurodivergent in any way. I think, so starting with something as crucial and as like classroom centric as that to there are fellows who are working on sports, dance, drama, like bringing all these kind of extracurriculars to life in every school, um, not just as hobbies or extracurriculars, but actually either as SEL or as opportunities for like upward social mobility. Um, then there are fellows who are working on like policy and governance, on making their kids and their communities aware about government schemes that are available to them and how they can benefit them, how they can avail them in the best way possible. So I think in that sense, it kind of really spans very large scope.
So what I'm hearing with these, like from bottom up to understanding where the community's needs are, like you said, you don't come in with the hero worship idea, you don't come in with a god complex, you come in to understand what the context is, and then you build out your BTCP like that, right? So you build it out either with the community or with the classroom. So it could be curriculum, it could be dedicated towards bringing in SEL, it could be dedicated towards bringing in different kinds of passion, even for the fellow, right? So somebody who's excited about sports, art, etc., is being able to bring that into classroom, right up to policy and government questions that we can bring in. So yeah, that's very exciting to know that fellows are not just doing the 2-year work with their classrooms, but they're also enabling voices across the board to make sure that we don't just stop here. We don't just stop with the 81 children that Riddhi is currently teaching, but like it just becomes a domino effect of sorts. Riddhi, I'm going to ask you like a tough one now, right?
Of course.
Okay, tell me, how does a fresh economics graduate out of Delhi find herself here, leading two projects in a community with 81 children, and not in an analyst, not in as an analyst, like in a firm somewhere, probably like a firm in somewhere like Nariman Point or BKC. How does that happen?
Um, I think that happened because I specifically, or like my batch entirely, right? Our final year of college was online as well. So it was basically just us sitting at home for a year, watching the world fall apart in like different pieces and wondering how this is the workforce you're going to enter, right? Wondering what went wrong for this to be the world that we kind of step into for the first time as a graduate, right? I think in that time I was going through like just this insane period of restlessness, of complete like lack of inspiration. And one of my seniors from college actually had started the fellowship before me, and she suggested that I volunteer um, in a classroom, just because also like Teach for India needed volunteers to step in at that time because of the pandemic, and also she felt like it might do me some good. Um, and so I started volunteering in this classroom. Um, I actually do know the kids now. I mean, one of the fellows in my cohort is placed in that classroom, so still kept in touch. But um, and then eventually, I think I just, over the 6 months that I was volunteering there, I think I just fell in love with this idea of teaching as a way to break this cycle of constant injustice, right? I think I it sounded too big in my head before I ever interacted with the kids, but I think once I stepped into the classroom, once I actually spoke to the children who were on the receiving end of this kind of education, it just showed me that it is possible, right? It is, as you said, it's daunting, it's challenging, and it doesn't work overnight. It takes a long time, but I think it is possible, and I think um, that's kind of where I started seeing the beauty in this. At the time, I remember me and all my classmates were looking at masters programs and career fairs and job opportunities and all of that, and I remember someone describing like the fellowship as being the biggest learning opportunity ever. They said because it's learning by doing, right? Like um, yes, you are trained, you are given support as a teacher, you're given like resources and all of that, but eventually it's you in that classroom with your kids. And everything that happens in the fellowship is a result of that interaction, of that space. And I think for me that sounded really very appealing. Also, the kids that I was volunteering with, one of them just when my volunteering was about to be over, she just asked if I'm joining the fellowship, and I asked her if she thinks I should, and she says, "Yeah, why not?" And I could not think of a good answer. So yeah.
Fair enough. I believe like the children that we work with also have a very high bar of excellence. Uh, Often in conversations, they've said, we know exactly the kind of Didi and Bhaiya we need in the classroom. So once we get to that point, we will join the teams that probably support the incoming fellows. And it's very, very precious because they say it with so much love, care, affection, but at the same time, they hold a really high bar on things. So Riddhi, I guess, that child did a magic, and then here you are. Um, and then it's so interesting you say that, it's learning by doing, right? Because very often we say, if you don't have a plan for the children in the classroom, the children have a plan for you. So there's just so much of that happening constantly. So there's so much of like falling and getting up and learning and unlearning, relearning. So it's interesting that you say that it was something that somebody told you, and that kind of just stayed with you long enough for you to want to join the fellowship, and the volunteering experience only added up to that. But tell us, what was your family and friends' reaction? You mentioned that at the same time your batchmates were going through career fairs and looking at master's programs. So how did they respond to this choice at the time?
Um, I was actually really lucky in that sense because my family and my friends were very supportive. They were very happy. I think they really understood why I wanted to do this so badly, why I felt this need of having to do the fellowship at this point. And I think because of that, they were very supportive. Um, but I also know that a lot of other fellows, especially in my cohort, right, who wanted to join in the middle of the pandemic, whose families may not have understood immediately. um, I think they reached out for support within Teach for India as well once the process started, right? I think they received like just a lot of help in terms of how to have that conversation with their loved ones, right? How to explain a decision like this to them in a way that they realize that this opportunity makes sense for you as well. And I think, um, yeah, I think just the purpose has to be strong. I know this is something they always tell us within Teach for India as well, right? Your why has to be really strong, and then everything else works out.
Yeah, we very often say that whether it's your family or your friends, we want the best for you. Just sometimes making them understand the choice that you're making, being patient with them, could be actually the game changing part of it, and not really being as rebellious as you would like for you to have to be. Even you spoke about the support within the ecosystem, and even when we're talking about your BTC, you spoke about co-fellows and your ecosystem support. Then you've done this for almost 2 years. We're almost towards the far end of the fellowship right now for you. Can you tell us a little bit about what skills do you feel like you picked up? You said learning by doing, so what are those learnings from those doings that you feel like you picked up, and which will be able to transfer itself no matter where you go?
Um, I think the the biggest skill that I can think of is multitasking. I think when you step into that classroom, you have to be many things at once, and especially for like a large classroom of kids. Like for instance, right now my classroom has 81 kids. You have to be many things at once, and you have to handle many things at once. And I think in that sense, it teaches you to multitask in a way that um, that's still productive. I think that is the real takeaway for me. I think just planning, right? I think when you're in charge of a classroom, when you're in charge of a kid's actual like learning journey, planning becomes so important in terms of where do you see them going, where they are right now, what are the checkpoints for that. I think a lot of that, even in terms of planning your own BTCP, managing and leading a project, planning just becomes a very important skill to kind of have in your corner. I think something that I was really scared of earlier was stakeholder management, right? Like just dealing with a very diverse set of people, um, communicating with them in a way that's actually helpful for you as well. I think that's something that terrified me just because I had not interacted with such like diverse people before. But having to speak to students, parents, school administration, like BMC staff, Teach for India, fellows, staff, and all of that. I think in that sense, just learning how to constantly interact with and work with so many people with such different interests as well. I think that's again a skill um, that's transferable for me. And yeah, I think uh, just, I'm not sure whether vision of excellence is the right word for it and whether that counts as a skill, but I think something that the fellowship has just taught is everything that you do, right? Like constantly asking yourself if it's your best or if it can be better. I think we once attended like a leadership forum at some training where someone shared whenever you're going through like a difficult situation with a child, always ask yourself, okay, what is the one thing that I have not tried yet for that child? Never like say that I've done everything that I can. And I think just, yeah, that in all spheres of life is something I'm going to remember.
Wow. So let me try and bring this together, right? There's multitasking, there's planning, the stakeholder management, and also communication. You mentioned about you hadn't communicated with that many people in different degrees. So even that was an aspect. And then you said vision of excellence. So it was like show up every single day and be better, right? There's always room for improvement. So have you done everything? The answer, like you said, has to be not yet, and then you try one more and one more and one more till you actually
Yeah.
get it correct, probably. Wow, that seems like a lot of things to have learned very early on in life. And I'm excited for you to be able to take that into, your like next set of work that you do, the next things that you are looking at, the next opportunities that you're looking at. Riddhi, you said like you spoke about also online to offline. Your children going through a very important adolescent phase during this period. Um, but their relationship with their Didi is just exceptionally special, and I don't think there's too many relationships out there in the world which can replace this bond that we uh, like create. And I know of uh, students who have now gone on to become fellows of their own, and they are still in touch with their didis and bhaiyas and call them didis and bhaiyas a decade plus later. So clearly there is something that is just that just stays with them as well as the fellows. Would love to know maybe one or two experiences in your almost 2 year journey, one or two examples, fun moments, scary moments, anything that you feel like you're just never going to forget. So give us maybe one embarrassing and maybe one fun one.
Oh my God. There's way too many to pick from. Honestly, this every day I feel like I can write a book. I think one is it's an early memory that just it's resurfaced recently because of something that a kid said, which is embarrassing though. So, um, so I remember my first offline class. So when I joined, things were still very much online, but I wanted to meet kids in small groups. So my first offline class was with 10 kids in like the school library, and we were all sitting with masks far away from each other and all of that. And I remember it was um, a poem writing class. I think the topic was where I see myself in 5 years. So I was speaking to the kids a lot, and it was my first offline class, and everyone I called actually showed up. So I think that for me was always a special moment. But um, the reason that I think I remember it so fondly now is one of the kids who attended that class came up to me, the poem that she had written in that class and all of that. And she started by saying, "Oh, I found it and I read it again." So I thought she was sharing, like a nice memory with me. And she says, um, the poem is quite bad actually. I'm sure I can do a much better job now. So I started laughing and I was like, "Oh no, don't be so hard on yourself." And I'm sure it was fine and all of that. And she says, "No, um, I remember who you were in that first class and how you are as a teacher now as well, right?" So she says, "You have also changed and grown a lot as a teacher." And I think that was the most honest feedback I have ever received from anyone. But yeah, I think just this, right? What you shared about the bond that you share with your kids. Um, yeah, just how honest they are, how unfiltered they are around you, and how I don't think anyone else in your life will ever treat you the same way as they do. I think, yeah, that is one memory that I'm gonna hold on to. Um,
Honest, right? I mean, people have often said, like my brothers and ones have always said, if you have gone into a classroom every single day and, showed up in front of 40, 60 children and you've not cried your way out of that, there's no chance that you're going to walk into a class in a boardroom with like 10 adults and feel intimidated, because children, like you said, are just unfiltered. So they're just going to tell you on your face, like, it wasn't up to the mark. Like the student of yours who said, don't worry, like you also have gotten better. And the reverse could also very well happen, right? Like children also will come up and say it wasn't as great a class, and you know it in your heart. And just like that is constantly a learning curve. But thanks for sharing that. Excited to know the next one for you.
um, the next one is actually it's actually a really sweet memory. So very recent. Can't even call it a memory. One of our new students who joined us this year actually from a different school who's never had Teach for India before, and it can be quite of a culture shock, like walking into a Teach for India classroom in the ninth grade for the first time. But yeah, He struggled a little academically, but and he is someone who is very creative, who likes to make vlogs, who likes to talk about himself through like art and media and all of that. So when he first heard about Nazaria, he showed a lot of interest. But then, because he figured that because of Teach for India, it would be in English primarily, he got a little intimidated and didn't actually show up when we had our first session and all of that. But of course, with some coaxing and all of that, he came for the sessions. Finally started showing up. He used to not show up to school every day, but he used to show up for the weekly workshop. And a few days ago, he told me that he actually likes coming to school now. He says because for the first time in his life, the people around him, and when he says people, he's not talking about just like us teachers, right? He's talking about his classmates. He's saying that they respect him because they know that he's good at something, right? And that something may not be academics yet, but they acknowledge that he has talent and that he has skills, and he feels like for the first time he can do something with school. He can actually make something happen for himself by coming to school. um, so I think, yeah, that is a very interesting case, right? Because we've always been taught that to do good in school you have to get good marks and you have to be good at exams. And there's this child who in a very like pure way says that that's not what matters. What matters is how I feel when I come to school, and right now it makes me feel good. So I think, yeah, that memory will stay.
I think that's the strength and beauty of creating a safe space, which is beyond academics, right? To say that a classroom can't just be about the maths equations and the English lessons, but it can also be about the creativity and the new things that you want to learn, just being able to reflect on your learnings, your journey. Because of that, probably this child and so many more, I'm sure, Riddhi, in your classroom and all of the others are turning up every single day to say, I'm going to do this well because I have fun, and slowly, while I get comfortable, I will also start to work on my academics. But it's such a balancing act, and it's such a difficult one. And most of us actually have not seen that balancing act, even coming from, so to say, privileged schools and backgrounds, we may not have seen that. So, very often we do tap into that experience of ours also when we're going into our classrooms. Thank you so much, Riddhi, for I kid you not. When you were sharing the second one, I literally got goosebumps. So thank you so much for sharing that. That was just like the midweek pick me up that I needed to go through the rest of the week. Um, Riddhi, you're almost towards the far end of the fellowship, and a question that we're very often asked: What after those 2 years? What are you going to do after those 2 years? So tell us a little bit about your current basket of choices that you and your co-fellows from the 2021 cohort are currently contemplating.
So, I think this question is on all of our minds right now, constantly worrying us. I think, just in terms of like what comes next and how we're planning for it. So we do have leadership development conversations with our program managers, who is our first and most immediate point of contact within Teach for India. Um, and in that conversation, basically, what we do is we reflect on what the last 2 years have been like for us. What are the strengths we've seen come out? What are the weaknesses we've seen come out? And how we can map all of that to our interests and kind of figure out what comes next. I think, in terms of what we're looking at is, internal career fairs, external career fairs. A lot of fellows are considering going for further studies, looking at master's programs, having identified exactly, which aspect of development in the social sector they want to actually like pursue further. I think um, there's a lot that we can there's a lot that we have to consider, obviously. I think I personally right now am most interested in continuing to work in the development sector, particularly with education. um, Maybe even in like after school kind of programs for the next at least, yeah, next chapter. I think for me it was because the last 2 years I just feel like I've changed a lot as a person. I've grown a lot as a person, and I feel like a lot of that came for someone like me purely because I was thrown into like the deep end and told to figure out like how to do it, right? And I think the development sector is just so vast that what the fellowship does is just opens your eyes a little bit to how little you know of reality, right? Like so much of what we know is what we think we understand about how these communities work and how the entire development ecosystem works. But um, I think what I've just become aware of is I know so little, and I think for me, working more to figure out different aspects of it, how to approach different aspects of like the this entire problem of inequity. I think for me that is what I'm most excited about. But I know like fellows who are work thinking of um, doing, like I said, like master's programs, or thinking of working, continuing to work within Teach for India, of even moving beyond education to like development at large. So yeah, lots on our plate.
Thanks, Riddhi, for actually just even sharing that journey, right? The fact that you actually go through the LDJ, what we call the leadership development journey, conversations with your manager, and the program managers are folks who have been fellows previously. So they've seen not just your journey, but they've also lived through that journey, and know what are the different feelings you're feeling at the moment. And from that to then the internal career fair, which is all the options that you will have within Teach for India, which will open up the external career fair, which is about 80 to 100 organizations which come to hire from us because they know the kind of fellows who can be brought into the sector. It's talent for not just the education equity movement, but also for the equity movement at large. There are also people who go into like corporates later, depending on what their choices are. You also mentioned that some of your co-fellows have identified like possible PhD or master's courses, so they're also looking at that. And I know a lot of them also look at possible scholarships, and this is something that, and there's also an ecosystem of sorts, right? There is 4,000 plus alums who have gone through this decision making, these choices, these scholarships and SOP writings and options of careers. So it's easy for someone to also reach out to them to say, what are the different things that I could do, because I'm maybe interested in a kind of a career. So it could be like teacher training, I'm interested. So what are the different things that are opening up for me versus I'm interested in maybe a master's or a PhD. So really glad that you actually opened up a little bit of that entire journey. Riddhi, we're just a couple of days away from our deadline, right? I kind of started the conversation today saying today's the 17th, 20th of November, which is the upcoming Sunday, is our deadline. You went through a similar deadline once upon a time to be able to be here today and just do the magical work that you are doing. What would be the advice that you have for people, like you said, who are contemplating being in the social impact or development sector and specifically are thinking of doing the fellowship?
I don't um, I don't know what makes me qualified for advice, but I think um, if genuinely, I think especially for people who are contemplating the fellowship, right? I think um, there can always be like so many reasons to not do it, just because it's a lot, it's daunting, and it seems like, you know, the challenge is almost too big, this kind of challenge of like education inequity, and making sure that every child in India gets an excellent education. It seems like a very momentous thing, but my advice to you would be just to go for it, to start somewhere, right? I think that kind of is what happened with me as well, right? I always felt like I wanted to work in the development sector, but I also always felt I can do it 5 years from now or 10 years from now, or do something else and then come here. But I think what really just helped was starting somewhere, and I think this is a very beautiful place to start. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Riddhi, for also like sharing the fact that it will always feel like a daunting moment to do this in. And it always feel like 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, when you're in a particular point in your career, maybe you turn around and do this. But there's always magic in just starting. There has to be a starting point. So why not now? We have a couple of questions from people. We had them kind of pouring in right when we started. So we'll try and see if we can answer some of them. Um, Preeti is from Delhi, so we Delhi is actually our largest site currently. So Riddhi happens to be in Bombay. I work out of the Delhi office. I'm happy to have a longer conversation. We're in Green Park. Um, there's Sahiba who's actually gone ahead and applied to be part of the fellowship. So fingers crossed, Sahiba. We have folks who are interested in volunteering. We understand that volunteering is something that we can do alongside your current responsibilities. But Riddhika, if I can have you come in, what do you think is the big difference between the volunteering and the fellowship? Very often we get thrown that question saying, why can't I volunteer alongside my job or alongside my education? What do you think is the big ask that we have here?
Um, I think the thing with the fellowship is when we call it a full time commitment, um, it's not just full time in terms of like, okay, yeah, the timing of the kind of work that you do. It's also full time just because that's what it actually takes to make a difference with your kids, right? Like, I think as you start actually taking responsibility for your set of kids, right? When you say that this is my class, this is my community, and I'm going to do something to change it, I think there's a lot of um, I mean, we discussed some of it, but like, there's a lot of back end work that goes into you just showing up to class with a lesson for your kids as well, right? Or to you starting a project with your community. I think what the fellowship does is it just allows you to immerse yourself so like fully in your classroom, in your school, in your community that um, yeah, I think that the view that you get of the development sector and of the problem at its core, right, I think is very, very different. I think when I was a volunteer, for instance, I spent maybe like an hour or a couple of hours talking to some kids, very few kids, right? And even then I had a specific role. They used to not call me when they were struggling. I never really understood what their families were going through, what the community ever needed, right? So I think in that sense, you feel, and now in retrospect, like having done the fellowship for these many months, I think I realize how responsibility and taking the ownership of that classroom is the biggest difference that the fellowship makes, right? Like, you feel responsible for your children, you feel responsible for whatever they're going through, and yeah, I think that's what makes it different.
I remember one of our alums from one of the earlier cohorts actually split the 2 years into almost like six months, to say the first 6 months just focus on the classroom. The next 6 months understand the community that the children come from. The next year is a little bit about expanding and doing a BTCP and understanding what kind of skill set have you been able to bring in, and what your understanding of the of the context of the community as well as your classroom has led to, because you slowly start to develop the project that you're probably going to be part of. And then the last 6 months is about, now that you have had all of that experience, what is this going to lead to? And we thought like that was an incredible way to just break it down, because very often people uh, ask this volunteering versus full-time question, but it's exactly what you said, Riddhi. It's such a minuscule part of something that you can be a part of when you're volunteering, and both in terms of the input and the impact, right? It's only a very little part that you can actually be yeah, you can kind of look at. Whereas in the fellowship, you have end to end ownership of the classroom. So from wanting to make it the most brightest looking classroom, to the safest space, to the difficult conversations with families, HMs, teachers, etc., to having projects like Project Nazaria and Project Ru happen, all of that and so much more is on the fellow. So because they are able to immerse themselves completely in that experience, they are able to actually pinpoint what are the things that they do. And all of you guys actually go ahead through so many of the the technical, like there, I know all of you have like key performance indicators, and there's monitoring and evaluation happening. So there's so many of that, like learning of skills happening. I don't know of a single fellow who's not been able to absolutely ace the Microsoft Excel game, and they have constantly looked at trackers and multiple kinds of softwares consistently. I don't know of anybody who's doing that as much. So thank you, Riddhi, for actually that's quite a contemplated question. Very often, people are constantly asking that question. So thank you so much for taking that up. There's a beautiful question about why is it difficult to get into the fellowship. Um, I'm going to try and answer that, and Riddhi would love for you to jump into it if you would like to add. It's true, we do have a 7 to 8% selectivity, so we understand that it is a difficult fellowship. So which goes to say that if for every 100 applications that we receive, only about 7 or 8 actually make it into the classroom and are fellows. But it's just what Riddhi started off saying. It's the vision of excellence. It's the level of preparedness. We want to be honest with the children, because we want to keep the children at the center of all of the decisions that are being made, but we also want to stay honest with the applicants who are coming in, right? We do not want you to struggle into a classroom. So we don't want you to be placed in a classroom and then kind of not find your way through all the different things that a fellow does. So we just try to balance that out to try and figure out, are you ready to show up every single day, do, learn, unlearn, relearn, all of that? And we try and look for that. But please do not let this deter you from going through the process. The process is a little bit intensive, but I assure you it's going to have an incredible team supporting you. You will have a very reflective journey. You will understand a lot about yourself in the process. So while we're on the topic of the application, I did mention 20th of November, just 3 days away. Please do spend enough amount of time. Riddhi is one of 1,000 fellows who are in our classrooms across 8 cities. You have Delhi in the north, you have Ahmedabad in the northwest, you have Pune and Bombay in the west, you have 3 cities in the south, Hyderabad, Chennai, and Bangalore, and you have the latest city, which is Calcutta in the east. So you do have representation across the board, across the country. Please make sure you start your application. You will have a team of recruiters who will reach out to you and support you. Look out in your email. You must have already received a lot of support. Riddhi is one of 1,000, and then we have also 4,000 plus alums. Just in terms of the impact that we create, for every 10 children, we have an impact of 1 in 10. So 1 in 10 children in the country are currently being impacted directly or indirectly by a Teach for India fellow. And it all started with starting that application. So it's a very simple process to go through. Trust me, it's just a little bit of your energy that goes, but it's all about you, that entire process. It's the apply.teachforindia.org. I'm going to request the team to post it across all of the different platforms that you are joining in from. But yeah, I'm going to keep looking at the questions if there's any that we want to kind of address right away. Bhavita, thank you so much for actually answering that question. Actually, yeah, the reason why we work in government schools or low income private schools is exactly because it's under resourced, it's underserved. Riddhi spoke about it earlier to say the voices have to account across the board, and we felt like we don't want to create a parallel system, right? We want to be part of the system and like make it better and better every single day. And therefore, we actually work already in the existing schools. We sign MOUs to be able to be part of that. Um, it is present in most metropolitan cities. Over the last 13 years, we've grown to 8 cities. Hopefully, we'll grow to more. Unfortunately, we're not in Jaipur. We'd love to be in Jaipur, but at this point of time, we're not. Um, we don't actually have an age barrier. I saw an earlier comment about somebody who's a human rights lawyer and would want to be part of the program. Interestingly, we've had people who've come in from the army, we've had people who've retired and come in, we've had people who've had 20, 25 years of experience in corporate and then come in. Our only ask at this point of time is the bachelor's degree, right? Because we do understand that the calling could have come in a little bit later, but never too late to go into the classroom and create magic. So for anybody who's considering, not just for yourself, tell your cousins, uncles, aunts. You're going to meet all of them in December during the festive season. Maybe just pull them to the side and talk to them a little bit about the movement. Yeah, I think that's all the questions, more or less. But please do remember the apply.teachforindia.org ID. You can start your application today. You can tell anybody and everybody that you know about this. Trust me, it's going to not take just one Megha, one Riddhi to be able to make this difference. We have 1,000 fellows, we have 300 plus staff members, we have 4,000 plus alums, and so many others who are supporters, our donors, our ecosystem supporters in terms of the schools that we work in, the HMs, the headmistresses, headmasters, the teachers who work with the non-teaching staff. We have an incredible ecosystem. So if you feel like you want to be part of a tribe which is all about creating the impact, this is the call that you were looking for. If you felt like this is the one place that you want to find people who are driven by what they want to do, not just in their immediate appraisal cycle, but 5 years, 10 years down the line, this is the place that you have to be in. On that note, Riddhi, would love to hear maybe some thoughts from you before we maybe close out for the day.
Um, no, and honestly, like, thank you for just talking about the fellowship as well, right? I think you get caught up so much in like the everyday of it that you don't get to sit and just talk about what it's been like and look back on it. And I think you summed it up really well at the end there, right? Like, um, I think this is what the fellowship is, right? It's an opportunity to just take all that kind of vision that we have, right, of wanting to do something, of feeling like we need to do something in just different aspects. But I think, yeah, all it takes is just deciding to start. Literally, that's all. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Riddhi. Just I felt like some other questions came in, so I'm going to quickly answer. Yes, it is a paid fellowship. Uh, you know, just start the registration. The team's going to get in touch with you. But to be fair, since you asked the question, it's actually 20,000 plus. So there is a PF component, etc. But we can walk you through all of the details. At this point of time, you can consider it about 20,000. Please mind, you like do not compare it to any salary or a CTC that you would have. It is a stipend. We're very well aware that it is a stipend to support you through the fellowship, but it's not comparable to any salary. But that's because the purpose of the fellowship is just very, very different from a job that you would probably be looking at. I think there's a question about Noida. We do have schools across Delhi, so we have it across south, east, northwest. So there will be schools which will be closer to Noida or will be closer to Gurgaon, as the case may be. So NCR, we definitely have fellows who are coming in. We can definitely connect you to those who are working in schools which are closer to either the Noida end or the Gurgaon end. If you're doing a BTech, Aryan had a question about BTech. So can I join this program? Absolutely. We said anything, any kind of background on bachelor's has to be it. So it's not because you did an engineering, this is not an obvious choice for you. We just required you to be a graduate by May or June of 2023. That is when we kick off our next year. So May or June of 2023 is when our fellowship for 2023 cohort will start. So by then you will have to be a graduate. Yeah, but the team can walk you through all the details. But if you're doing your BTech and in your final year, I would highly recommend for you to go through it. I would highly recommend you to do a quick LinkedIn research also on the number of engineers we have brought in. We have so many people from STEM, just like Riddhi's from economics. We have so many people. We do have people from all of the different walks of life. We've had lawyers, architects, yeah, we had people pretty much. There's nobody that you would not find. We even have an alum who's gone ahead and made a movie on Netflix. So you never know. Uh, yeah, so those are the questions that immediately came in. But do go ahead and register and keep an eye out on your inbox, because chances are that the team will immediately follow it up with resources, with messages, with emails to support you through your application. So while we do make it a little bit difficult to get into the fellowship just because we owe that as a responsibility to the children that we work with, we do it with the best of intention, but we do it also with a lot of support. So you will have a team to support you. As a matter of fact, even this particular live was made exactly in service to making sure that you have answers to all the questions that have probably often popped up in your head. Um, yeah, so just to remind you, 20th of November is the last date of the current deadline. So we will have another deadline, but please make sure 3 days, 3 days is really strong for you to start your application. The upcoming deadline is Sunday. You have the weekend, sitting down and writing it on the weekend, nothing better than that. Riddhi, last thoughts. I promise, last thoughts.
Um, no, just like hearing you talk about the application deadline took me back to my own application process. But um, yeah, I think just the last thought is, even as I'm thinking of like my own kids, right? I'm about to like transition out of my classroom, and I'm thinking of the kind of fellows that I want in coming in to teach them next, right? Because it's personal. Just if any part of this appeals to you, or if you think that there's any part of you that could actually make a difference, please do apply for the fellowship. I think even the application process is so reflective, and it teaches you so much about yourself and your own priorities and what drives you. Um, and yeah, I think as Megha mentioned, right, like it takes a very very large village to make a movement like this work. So yeah, please do join that village.
Great. Thank you so much, Riddhi. On that note, we will close it out for the day. Thank you very much. Please keep engaging with all of our respective channels. You guys are logging into our different platforms, so you can continue to connect with us. You can also continue to ask questions on this live stream. This live stream will be on the specific timelines, so feel free to do that. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. Thank you so much, Riddhi, for actually being able to do this on a weekday. And what I can only imagine was an intense class day.